All right, so get this. Today, we are going deep, deep, deep into all things Shakespeare.
Ooh, exciting.
Right. Specifically, we're trying to figure out who was the real William Shakespeare,
Okay.
and maybe even figure out what led him to write, Romeo and Juliet.
Sounds like fun.
It does. And we've got a pretty good starting point. We've got tons of biographies, some encyclopedia entries, and even some articles from, historical websites.
Awesome. Well, what makes Shakespeare so interesting is that even though we have all these incredible works he left behind,
Yeah,
his personal life is still a bit of a mystery.
it really is. It's like a puzzle with some pretty dramatic pieces.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Like, we know he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, or at least baptized,
Okay.
on April 26, 1564.
Hmm.
But we don't even know his actual birthday.
Wow.
It's like the mystery starts right from the beginning,
Yeah, for sure. And then when he's 18, he marries Anne Hathaway.
Oh, yeah.
And she's 26 and already pregnant. I mean, that was pretty unusual even for those times, Elizabethan England.
Right.
And then they have twins, Hamlet and Judith, very soon after.
Wow.
So it seems like even though he was young, Shakespeare took being a husband and a dad pretty seriously.
Yeah, so maybe not the carefree, wandering bard that some people imagine.
All right, exactly.
Especially during those lost years.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
1585 to 1592, where all the historical records about him just vanish.
Yeah, it's weird.
Right?
Really.
It's so strange. Some people say he was out poaching deer.
Oh, wow.
Others say he was a school teacher.
Okay.
There's even a theory that he was holding horses for all the fancy people going to the theater in London.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you imagine
I know.
the future author of Hamlet just standing around outside the Globe holding someone's horse?
It's crazy.
Paints a very different picture of him, doesn't it?
It really does. But whatever he was up to during those years,
Yeah.
by 1592, he's in London. And he's not just acting.
Uh-huh.
He's writing, too.
That's right.
And clearly, he was making a name for himself.
He was.
But not everyone was happy about it.
Oh, no.
Right.
Remember Robert Greene,
Okay.
another playwright at the time? He called Shakespeare an upstart crow,
Oh, wow.
all dressed up in someone else's feathers.
Ouch.
Yeah, and being called a Johannes Factotum, like a jack of all trades.
Uh-huh.
That wasn't a compliment back then.
No.
It implied that he was trying to do too much and wasn't really a master of anything.
So basically, the theater world back then was just as competitive and cutthroat as, Hollywood today.
Totally. But, talent always finds a way.
That's true.
And Shakespeare was definitely talented.
For sure. By this point, he was writing comedies, histories, and then in 1595, bam, Romeo and Juliet hits the stage.
Can you imagine
Oh, I know.
being in that audience
Yeah.
and seeing this tragic love story come to life?
Yeah, yeah. The language, the passions, the drama, it must have been unbelievable.
It would have been incredible. It probably was the talk of London.
For sure, for sure. But in that same year, something really, really sad happened. Shakespeare's son, Hamlet, he died.
Oh, no.
He was only 11 years old.
That's so sad.
It's heartbreaking. And it makes you wonder if losing his son like that, if that influenced his writing,
Yeah,
especially in a play like Romeo and Juliet,
right.
with
Well,
all the, powerful emotions about young love and dying too young.
it definitely makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. It adds a whole other layer of meaning to the play's themes of, grief and loss.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even with all that personal tragedy, Shakespeare was still building a really, really successful career.
That's right. He was doing well, making good money from the theater.
Yeah.
In fact, just a couple years later, in 1597, he buys New Place
Oh, wow.
in Stratford. It was the second biggest house in town.
Wow. Talk about climbing the social ladder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like Romeo tries to defy the social divide between the Montagues and the Capulets.
That's a great point. He went from maybe holding horses outside the theater
Yeah.
to owning one of the nicest houses in town.
He did. Sounds like Shakespeare knew how to play the game, right?
He really did. But of course, all that success,
Yeah.
it wouldn't go unnoticed,
Oh, no, definitely not.
especially by the most powerful person in the land,
Right.
the king.
The king. So in 1603, King James I takes the throne.
Oh, okay.
And guess what? He was a huge fan of Shakespeare.
Oh, wow.
He was. So not only was he a fan,
Yeah.
he became their patron.
What?
Yeah. Their company changes its name to the King's Men.
No way.
And they got paid double what they were making before.
Oh, wow. Talk about a royal stamp of approval.
I know, right?
So was it this new patronage
Mm-hmm.
that maybe explains when Macbeth was written?
It's very possible. It was likely written between 1604 and 1606.
Okay.
And, King James was obsessed with witchcraft.
Oh,
And guess what features super prominently in Macbeth?
witches.
Witches. Coincidence? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It seems pretty clear Shakespeare knew how to please his audience,
Right.
especially when that audience included the king.
He was smart, like really smart.
Totally.
Speaking of knowing how to please your audience,
Yeah,
Shakespeare also made some pretty interesting choices when he was adapting his source material.
that's true. Like in Macbeth,
Yeah.
remember how he used Holinshed's Chronicles as a source?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the Chronicles, Banquo actually helps murder King Duncan.
Really?
But in the play, he's like this totally noble, innocent guy.
Huh.
Pretty clever move considering King James claimed to be a descendant of Banquo.
Oh, wow. So he was like, really playing to his audience.
For sure.
That's brilliant. Okay, so we've seen Shakespeare as a family man,
Yeah.
as a savvy businessman,
Mm-hmm.
as a playwright who really knew how to work the system.
Right.
Now let's get back to Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. Let's dive into what might have inspired this timeless love story about, forbidden love and feuding families and fate.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, I think a good place to start is his own marriage.
Yeah, his early marriage.
Yeah, when he was just 18, he married Anne, who was
Right.
8 years older.
Yeah.
I mean, and maybe it's not exactly Romeo and Juliet, but it's
Yeah.
still young, love-defying, what society expected.
Totally.
And that was something Shakespeare experienced himself firsthand.
And then, of course, there's the loss of his son, Hamlet.
Oh,
That kind of grief,
Uh-huh.
especially when it's, tied to a child.
Yeah,
It must have been just incredibly difficult to process.
it must have been. It's hard to imagine that it didn't have any impact on his writing.
Yeah,
Especially during that time.
for sure.
The play's themes of love and loss and fate,
Yeah.
they become even more powerful
Mhm.
when you think about what Shakespeare was going through personally.
It's like those lines about grief just hit differently when you know about what happened to his son.
They do.
But it wasn't just his personal life that he was drawing from.
Yeah.
Right.
No, not at all.
Our sources also mentioned, like, some Italian tales that inspired the play.
Exactly. Romeo and Juliet, I mean, it wasn't completely original.
Right.
Shakespeare borrowed from several different sources,
Okay.
including a poem from 1562
Okay.
by Arthur Brooke.
Good.
It's called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet.
Wow. So that's like almost 30 years before Shakespeare's play.
It is. And even Brooke's poem, that was based on even older Italian stories.
Oh, wow. So, like, were there real-life Romeo and Juliet stories going around back then?
Not real life in the sense of like actual historical figures,
Oh, yeah.
but those types of stories,
Mhm.
about star-crossed lovers from feuding families.
Yeah.
They were really common
Okay.
in folklore and literature.
Gotcha.
I think they speak to these universal themes of forbidden love and what happens when, when conflict goes too far.
Yeah, it's like those themes are just built into us,
They are.
Like part of the human experience.
Exactly.
No matter what time period you're living in.
Yeah, and Shakespeare, he didn't just make up the story.
Right.
He tapped into something that was already so deeply human, and it resonated with audiences back then, and
Yeah.
it still resonates with us today.
And that's what makes it so timeless, right?
It is.
Like, it's a story that keeps moving us,
Yeah.
inspiring us,
Uh-huh.
even centuries later.
It's amazing.
It really is. And it's like a testament to Shakespeare's genius
Mm-hmm.
that he could take these existing stories
Right.
and transform them into something so, extraordinary.
He did. He didn't just, retell the story.
Right.
He brought his own unique perspective to it, his wit, his understanding of people.
Yeah.
And, of course, that incredible way with words that we're still, marveling at today.
And to think he did all of this
Yeah.
while he was dealing with, like, all the ups and downs of being a playwright,
Right.
building his career,
Uh-huh.
dealing with personal tragedy. I mean, it's like, how did he even find the time to write?
I know, right? It's pretty amazing.
It really is. But I guess that's part of what makes Shakespeare so fascinating.
I think so, too.
He's, like, full of contradictions.
Yeah. He's a shrewd businessman,
Yeah.
but he's also this brilliant artist. He's a family man, but he's, thrust onto this public stage.
Right.
He's very much a product of his time.
Yeah.
But he somehow created these works that, they just transcend time.
Yeah, it's like trying to capture lightning in a bottle.
Haha, It really is.
Like, we may never really fully understand the man behind the plays,
Maybe not.
but I think the search itself,
Yeah,
that's part of what keeps us, coming back to them.
I agree. And in a way, the mystery makes it even more interesting. We have to, like, fill in the gaps ourselves. Connect the dots and come to our own conclusions.
It's like he's inviting us to, like, be detectives.
It is.
In his life.
It's an invitation to really engage with his work on
Yeah.
a much deeper level.
And find our own meaning, right?
Exactly.
And connect with his words in a way that's, personal to us.
I love that.
So after all this, after this deep dive into Shakespeare's life and times,
Yeah.
what have we learned?
I think we have a much better understanding now of just how complex his life really was.
Right?
And how that complexity might have shaped his writing.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen how his personal experiences impacted him.
Yeah.
His ambition, his understanding of, like, power dynamics.
Yeah.
And how he used those existing literary traditions.
To create something new.
Exactly.
We might not be able to say for sure
Right.
this one thing is what inspired Romeo and Juliet.
Right.
But we can see those echoes of his life woven into the play.
Exactly. And those echoes connect us,
Mhm.
not just to Shakespeare's time, right?
But also to our own.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that those themes he was exploring,
Yeah, like love, loss, fate.
Yeah, yeah. And that struggle against what society expects of us, those are all just as relevant and powerful today
Right.
as they were back then.
Back in Elizabethan England.
Yeah.
And that's why we're still talking about him today, performing his plays,
Yeah.
debating his genius.
After all these centuries.
Yeah. It's not just about the words on the page, right? It's about that power of stories to connect us across time and culture.
Absolutely. And speaking of enduring power,
Yeah.
that brings us to something we want you, our listeners, to think about. Okay, so what if you were directing Romeo and Juliet today?
Yeah. How would you bring that story
Yeah.
to a 21st century audience?
Oh, that's such a cool question. It's like Shakespeare gave us this amazing blueprint,
Right.
but we get to choose the materials and, like, the style of the building. Exactly. Like, where would you even set it? A modern high school?
Ooh.
Maybe a city divided by, like, social and economic lines? Or even like a virtual world
Oh, wow.
where people only connect through avatars and online communities.
That's a great idea.
Right.
The possibilities are just, like, endless. And then there's the casting.
Oh, yeah.
Could you cast Romeo and Juliet from different cultural backgrounds to explore the idea of forbidden love in a whole new way?
It would definitely make people think.
Yeah.
And what about the music?
Oh, the music.
Would you use like a classical score?
Yeah.
Or go with something totally unexpected?
Like what?
Like hip hop or electronic music.
Yeah.
To, like, really bring out those raw emotions of the play.
I love that. It's so interesting to imagine how those choices would affect, like, the whole experience. It's Shakespeare's inviting us to collaborate with him, to keep his words alive.
And make them relevant for each new generation.
Yes, exactly.
He's given us this story that, like, never gets old.
Yeah.
But it's up to us to find new ways to make it hit home.
To make it matter to us. I think that's the beauty of really great art,
It really is.
It goes beyond its time and place and speaks to us in new ways, even centuries later.
Okay, so we've done it. We've traveled through the life and times of William Shakespeare.
We have.
We've gotten to see the man behind all those famous plays. And we explored the power of Romeo and Juliet.
His masterpiece.
We might not ever fully understand, all the mysteries about him.
Right.
But we can definitely find inspiration in his work.
Absolutely.
And discover new things in his words every time we read them.
Yeah, that's the great thing about Shakespeare.
We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive.
I hope so, too.
And that it's made you a little bit more curious about who the real William Shakespeare was. What inspired him to write Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah. What do you think inspired him?
And how would you reimagine it for today's world?
Keep asking those questions.
Yeah.
Keep exploring and keep Shakespeare alive by bringing his stories to life in your own way.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.
Until next time, happy exploring.